right, welcome. I'm Carla and I run Healing Birth. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about me and how I came to be doing this work before I kick into sharing with you what I've come to understand are the key causes of there being so much birth trauma taking place. And I'm just utilising a little slideshow here. Please, if you have any questions while I'm talking, you can either put them in the chat box, or you could raise your hand if you don't know how to do that. At the bottom of your screen, I'm not in the right one to be able to see it, but there's, if you can find it, there's like a raise hand option. That way I can kind of stop when there's a good opportunity to do so. Or if there's an opportune moment, feel free to just press your space bar or take yourself off mute and ask a question out loud. All good. I have got a bit to get through. I would really love your input, but maybe if there's nothing really pressing as I'm going through, we'll save some time at the end for some Q&A and sharing, discussion. But yeah, if there's anything pressing or if something's not making sense to you, I would really, really love for you to put your hand up or jot the question down in the chat or take yourself off mute. Because if you've got a question that's really pressing or something you're not understanding, there's probably other people in the group who have the same question in their minds. Alrighties. So this little image to the right here is the cover to a report I wrote that I'm going to talk about in a minute. All right, so how did I get into birth trauma work in the first place? And I'm going to take you back a bit here. I'm going to try and keep this succinct, but I sort of feel like it's quite important for you to appreciate, I guess, how I came to be doing this work. And what knowledge I bring to it. So if we go back to my upbringing, I had this vision of birth as being this beautiful, exciting family affair, really. I developed this vision of birth from hearing my own birth story. So I was the third of three children to be born, and my mum and dad planned to give birth to me at home, which in the 70s New Zealand wasn't particularly common. And although I didn't end up being born at home, my mum had a really beautiful, gentle and empowering birth experience with me. And if you want to hear about that story, because I think it's just such an epic story, and I really do feel like it was that led me down this path in the first place. My podcast, Healing Birth with Carla, it's the very first episode I did. I interviewed my mum, and she talks about my birth. So if you want to hear that, you can listen to the podcast. But yeah, I grew up with this, there were home birth books in our house, and they had these gorgeous pictures of, women birthing in the lounge by the fire with the dog lying down at their side and naked except for socks on their feet, and, faces with expression of kind of wide-eyed but also blissful. And so I thought, I want to be a part of that experience. I want to become a midwife when I grow up. And that's what I did. I was really, really enthusiastic about working in birth because I had this beautiful vision of what birth was, and I wanted to be a part of it and part of people's experiences. So I became a midwife. When I left school, that's what I did. I went on to study midwifery down in Dunedin. And of course, being a midwifery student and experiencing birth in the real world in the mid-90s, hospital births, it was nothing like the vision of birth that I had held. And it was quite shocking to me, actually. I remember very vividly um, uh, my first kind of real experience of witnessing like blatant kind of trauma, and it was the first of just countless examples. But this mum, who I had attended a few of her antenatal appointments with her midwife, and I had the gift of attending her birth of her first baby. She birthed in hospital, and she did a beautiful job of birthing her baby. And she had torn and needed to be sutured, and the obstetrician was called in to suture her. And I remember this gruff guy walking into the room. He didn't congratulate this new mum. He didn't smile at her. He kind of just briefly introduced himself and then sort of sat himself down at the end of the bed in between her splayed legs, and proceeded to inject anaesthetic around her wound. And then he was putting the needle into her tissues, and she was tensing up and drawing her bum back up the bed, and like was clearly in pain. And instead of this obstetrician saying, offering her more pain relief, he slapped the insides of her thighs, and he said, relax, relax. How am I supposed to do this if you're going to tense up like that? And I was just like floored. I was like, what am I witnessing? And what was equally shocking to me was that it kind of just seemed so normal. Like, why wasn't the midwife saying something? Or why wasn't the husband or partner saying something? It was just kind of like, is this just what happens in birth? Like, I was really shocked. And but I came to realize that that sort of thing happens all the time in the birth space. Yeah. So fast forward a few years, I got pregnant with my daughter a couple of years into my midwifery practice. I was raising her as a solo mum, and I did my last bit of midwifery when she was 2. It was a real struggle to, be a midwife and a solo mum, and it just wasn't really going to happen. So I left midwifery behind, and it was quite a relief. But I knew I wanted to keep working in the birthing world, and I just didn't know what that would look like. And some years later, my sister was working as a space facilitator, working with new mums in the first year of their baby's life, meeting with them weekly, and kind of discussing lots of things related to parenting a newborn. And she was hearing all these story after story of really upsetting or traumatic births. And she was contacting me with my midwifery background going, oh my gosh, Carla, what do I say to these mums? I don't know what to say to them. I don't know where to send them for help. Like, what do I do? And I was like, actually, Jen, I don't know much at all about birth trauma. It wasn't something we kind of learnt about in midwifery school, and I was trying to do a bit of research around it to find out what support networks were available, and what information I could find on birth trauma, and there was not much at all. And so I sort of took it upon myself. I remember saying to Jenny, my sister, look, if any of these women who you're working with want to come and share their story with me, I'm happy to listen. I don't know if I'll have any advice to offer, but I'm happy to listen. And a few of them did come and share their story with me. And I think just having the opportunity to share their story with somebody who wasn't going to invalidate this experience, who wasn't saying to them, oh, well, at least you've got a healthy baby, or look at the positives, and this is the sort of messaging that new mothers are hearing all the time when they are sharing, courageously sharing about how awful their birth was. So of course, I didn't do that. I listened and I said, that sounds really awful. I'm so sorry you went through that. And And you know, the feedback I got from from doing that was like, wow, it felt really, really good to be able to share and be heard in my experience. And I was sort of like, well, that was easy. Why isn't, you know, there more of that sort of support around? And I really wanted to understand more about what sort of support was available. So anyway, I decided to conduct my own survey of birth trauma in New Zealand, and it was an anonymous online survey that anybody who identified as having experienced birth trauma was welcome to fill out if they so desired. I got 319 responses to that survey, and which blew me away, and in and of itself told me a whole lot. But that survey report on the findings is on my website. So if you want to, you can access it under the About tab on my website, healingbirth.co.nz. And that gave me some really big insights into what women believed to be the cause of their birth trauma and what sorts of consequences were a result of their traumatic birth experience, along with a whole lot of other information. The survey itself and the report, it's not an academic piece. That wasn't the intention from the get-go. I just kind of wanted to find out more for myself, and it ended up being such a big thing that I was like, I need to let these voices be heard, and I need to put this out there. So it's not an academic piece, but there's a lot to learn from hearing people's raw stories, their voices. Right. I feel like we need to begin by sort of defining trauma. And trauma generally, we can say, is the physical, mental, and emotional responses to an overwhelming event where loss of control and fear trigger the body to enter survival mode. So we can obviously relate this to the birth space, and you'll notice that I highlighted the word responses there. No worries, Jasmine. Thanks for the note. So yeah, responses, because I think especially with something like birth trauma, people tend to think that it needs to be a certain type of birth in order to be categorized as traumatic, right? But it's actually not the events per se. It's not how a woman is giving birth that determines whether her experience was traumatic or not, but rather it's her internal responses to the events. So two people can have the exact same types of birth experiences, but their internal responses could be completely different. And for one person, you know, that emergency cesarean could be incredibly traumatic. And for another person, a similar emergency cesarean scenario could feel like a positive experience. It could feel empowering, healing even. And in fact, the most recent episode on my podcast was an interview with a mum who did have two cesareans, two emergency cesareans, unplanned, you know, and they were polar opposites in terms of, you know, the first was a really traumatic experience, the second was a really healing, positive, and empowering experience. And I feel like there's kind of a couple of key pieces that determine how, you know, what those internal responses are going to be like. And one of them is history. What does that mum have a history of trauma? You know, has she experienced sexual assault or sexual abuse in the past? Is she from a marginalized community where, you know, she's grown up with a lot of trauma? And the other big piece is what sort of support is or isn't surrounding that mother as she goes through that event, right? And you can really hear this come through on that podcast episode. So if you want to have a listen, it's the most recent one. Just put it out last Friday. And then the other aspect that I've highlighted there is loss of control and fear. right? So, and I kind of, yeah, fold that into the term disempowerment. So what I've come to understand is that birth trauma is rooted in disempowerment and an experience of disempowerment. And tonight I want to talk about what the causes are for that disempowerment. Why are women, what's causing women to feel like, disempowered through the birth process? Because I believe birth is designed to actually be a really empowering experience. It's something that we are given all the necessary sort of resources within ourselves, hormonal and, intuitive and those sorts of things, to enable us to work through the challenges of birth and come out the other side and kind of go, fuck yeah, look at what I just did, look at what my body is capable of. Look at what happens when I listen to my instincts and my intuition. And I think that's a really, really important part of birth, because that's what primes us to be able to shift into that next phase of our lives, which is, this massive transition into motherhood, where we need to be able to trust our instincts and our bodies, to be able to feed and nourish our babies, to be able to make good decisions on their behalf, to be able to respond to them very intuitively. And they depend on that as well. So I think it's really, really important that as many women as possible are supported to experience birth as empowering for that reason, so that they begin motherhood primed in the ways that they need to be, rather than, and this is what I'm hearing time and again, and I'm sure a lot of you are in your roles, and that is, they enter motherhood feeling completely, disempowered, but like, my body is faulty, I can't trust myself, I have to depend on everyone outside of me to make good decisions for this baby. I don't even feel connected to my baby. What sort of mother am I? They have all this guilt and shame around how their baby came into the world, and they believe it was their fault. And that is not how we need to be entering the massive challenges of new motherhood, especially in a culture where there is sweet FA support for our new families. It's awful. I mean, when you have an amazing birth experience, a really positive and empowering one, it's still massively challenging in our current culture to raise a newborn. So yeah, add trauma on top of that, unresolved trauma, unacknowledged trauma that you're not even aware is trauma because it's become so normalized, because you keep being told, just be grateful, could have been worse, at least you've got a healthy baby. Yeah. So we need to remember that birth trauma is subjectively determined. Only the person who gave birth can say whether the experience felt traumatic or not. And so to the outside, like, I hear stories of women who have really fast births, really straightforward, really fast births. They gave birth at home unexpectedly because they never made it to the hospital because it all happened so quickly. And they find it really hard to share their story because everybody they're met with, oh, lucky you, wow, you had a really quick, easy birth. Gosh, I wish mine had been fast. Mine was 3 days, and no acknowledgement that could have been a really traumatic experience for her. And often is, it can be really, really shocking when you don't have that time to wrap your head around what's going on and to, that quote there is from the survey that I conducted. So it's got lots of quotes in it. If you read through it, there's plenty. Most of those around me, including my midwife at the time, did not see my emergency cesarean as a trauma. And part of what we're going to talk about tonight is about the over-medicalisation of birth. I mean, we have a 30% cesarean section rate in New Zealand. It's probably higher. That statistic it's probably a couple of years old now. And you know, like, so cesareans are happening almost one out of every 3 births in New Zealand. So it's become so common that, you know, midwives and doctors are witnessing this all the time. So of course they're going to kind of normalize it. Of course they're not going to kind of have this lens on it like, oh my gosh, you had to have a cesarean, like far out. That must have been really full on for you. How are you feeling about that? You know? So yeah, this, yeah, and this quote just is kind of really reiterating that point of like not making any assumptions about somebody's experience around how their birth felt for them based on how it looked from the outside, or what your own experience of birth was. I kind of define birth trauma into 2 main categories. The first I call shitty bad luck. These are the kind of the births where no matter how, you know, how much good information the woman had throughout her pregnancy going into her birth, no matter how much trust she had in her birthing physiology, no matter how much support, awesome support she had from her care providers, that nothing could have stopped what happening. So examples would be like her going into premature labor, or having a stillbirth. You know, there's lots of other examples I could give there. So that's one category. The other is a shitty system and culture of birth care. And I've kind of listed a bunch of things that I would categorize come under that. And I'm going to talk to them a bit more in future slides. But just to read these out to you, no, there is definitely a culture of fear and mistrust regarding birth in general. And that's, we're conditioned to fear birth and to not trust our birthing bodies from the get-go in multiple ways. There is a lot of lack when it comes to informed consent in the birth space. This came through super loud and clear in that survey that I conducted, and it is an ever-present voice when people are sharing their birth stories with me. You know, like I've worked with hundreds of people, supporting them to find healing after their traumatic birth experiences. And yeah, informed consent is, or lack thereof, is something I hear of in pretty much every story. There's also coercion, bullying, obstetric violence that are often, yeah, a part of what contributes to the experience of disempowerment. There's a fragmented care, you know, like, yeah, we used to have, I mean, New Zealand has kind of been touted as having, you know, a top-notch sort of maternity care system. And indeed, we're really, you know, fortunate in that we can choose, you know, to birth at home if we want to, and that's covered under the public system. We can choose to birth in a maternity, in like a birthing unit, or we can choose to birth in hospital, and we can choose who our lead maternity carer is, who we have as our midwife, and have them provide continuity of care throughout our whole pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. But that's becoming less and less possible as we have, you know, for a long time, many years now, we've had a severe shortage of midwives in New Zealand, and that was made all the worse when we had the mandates enacted, and we lost a lot of our amazing home birth midwives who were really, really supportive of, you know, informed consent, etc. So yeah, fragmented care, and as well, there's a real shortage of staff in the hospitals, and I'm hearing a lot of trauma for people based on that, you know, that experience of there wasn't, nobody was answering my call bell, you know, that the catheter was left left unchecked, and that caused big issues. I just had a cesarean and I couldn't pick my crying baby up, but nobody was answering my call bell. And and hearing all different advice around breastfeeding, and just the staff not having time to sit and be and listen, and, you know, have those supportive, compassionate conversations with women after their births. And over medicalisation, and I've put blamed on women. So, you know, the statistics are kind of ridiculous, and getting more so as the years go on, around numbers of women who are being encouraged to induce their labours, for instance. So a third of New Zealand women are having their labours induced. You know, and like I said before, almost a third are giving birth by caesarean. There is, yeah, a lot of syntocin and augmentation, so speeding up labours with synthetic oxytocin. There's lots of operative deliveries taking place. There are countless interventions, and the rates of which are going up and up, and they are not based on good evidence. All right, so these interventions that are being encouraged are they're done in the name of safety, right? They're encouraged to increase safety, usually for the baby, but sometimes for the mum. Yet, if we look at the statistics, we've got these climbing rates of these interventions that are supposed to be saving our babies, and then we look at the rates of neonatal death, that stayed very, very stable. So rates of intervention, baby loss. So yeah, it's a lot of what's being advised is not based on good, robust evidence. So I thought to just kind of like summarize for you a scenario that a story that was shared with me of somebody's birth experience that kind of speaks to a lot of these points I've made under the shitty system and culture of birth care. Title is the story of a mum who was encouraged to have the the gestational diabetes screening test done, and she was found to be very mildly diabetic. So she was her blood sugars returned a slightly high result, and enough to categorize her as having gestational diabetes. So she was put under the specialist care team, and she met with a nutritionist, and who explained, you know, we need to keep your blood sugar levels within this range, and you need to test like this, and you know, this is how you can keep your blood sugars stable. And this mama was like onto it, and she kept her blood sugar levels beautifully stable through the rest of her pregnancy. And near the end of her pregnancy, not only was she encouraged to have multiple growth scans, because one of the things with gestational diabetes is a concern that the baby might get too big. She also needed to go and see the obstetrician to like have a specialist consult regarding her birth, her upcoming birth. And so the scans were perfectly normal, which is no surprise at all, because if you've got normal blood sugar results, your baby isn't going to grow any bigger than any other person's baby. And she went along to this obstetric referral, this appointment, and the doctor said to her, so we're going to need to induce you at 39 weeks. And she was like, well, what's that about? You know, like my scan result. No. She said to him, why would you need to induce at 39 weeks? And he said to her, to save your baby's life. That was his response. So like lack of informed consent there. There you go. So that was his explanation. That was the information she was given around why she needed an induction, was to save her baby's life. She said but the scan results showed that the baby was a good size. So like, you know, why is my baby at any more risk than any other baby? And he said, oh, I don't trust the scan. I don't trust the scanners. You know, like they get it wrong a lot of the time. I wouldn't listen to that. And she said, and I don't think he even looked at the fact that my blood sugar levels were perfectly fine throughout. And all the evidence shows that if your blood sugar levels are fine, that your birth shouldn't be any more troublesome than anybody else's. So she was advised to have, so she went ahead with it, because who wants to risk, you know, like she trusted the obstetrician was the expert, the specialist. And so she had this induction at 39 weeks, and it was horrific. It went on for 4 days. Her baby was born at like a good size, fine, you know, and she was left really, really traumatized by this very medical, exhausting, scary labor. And as with many induction stories, there's this sort of flow-on effect, this cascade of interventions that occurs, and her baby got distressed at the end of her labor, and she ended up with an emergency cesarean. So after 4 days of kind of torture, that was the end result. So yeah, that fragmented care piece there, you know, like, yeah, it's, I do wonder if the obstetrician had actually looked at the records, or had he gone, she's diabetic, and this is how we manage diabetics. So there's this real kind of lack of acknowledgement of, you know, unique scenarios, or yeah, that we're not all going to fit into these little boxes. And in fact, it would be strange for us to fit into every norm that the medical system sort of expects us to fit into when it comes to birth. So when I initially work with people, I think most believe that they got the top category, that they had a shitty bad luck scenario. They don't understand that what they went through wasn't their fault, wasn't their body letting them down, wasn't, yeah, because we've really done a good job of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like priming people to be compliant and to fear birth and to do what they're told when it comes to birth. And so, you know, there is all this trust in the professionals. And so when they come out the other side of that sort of a birth experience, it's usually with a narrative that goes something like, it was just as well I was in the hospital and the experts were there to rescue my baby from my faulty body. Some version of that. Thank goodness I had to be saved. And there's no understanding that it was probably the interventions that were done in the name of safety that were the very thing that caused the birth to become traumatic and unsafe. So, you know, a lot of the work I do is around helping people to understand that very thing, unpacking their birth with a different lens. Yeah, we're primed for compliance, right? We grow up in a culture that teaches us to be good girls, and a good girl is quiet and she's non-argumentative, she's unopinionated, she's obedient. Who here is a people pleaser or a recovering people pleaser? I know I am. It's really common, especially among women, that we gain our sense of worth, our sense of lovability from putting other people's needs before our own. And it was probably something that we witnessed our mums doing as well as we were growing up. That becomes really problematic in the birth space when we are trying to we're believing we need to be a good, compliant girl and do as we're told, yeah, that's not going to be helpful when it comes to giving birth. We are we're primed to trust authority figures unquestioningly. So that whether that's, teachers or parents or priests or doctors, etc., anybody who is older than us, probably, we are told that, we need to take their word as gospel and you don't question authority figures. We're taught to tune out to our body wisdom from a very young age, and there's countless examples of this. The ones that I often bring up are, you have a headache, and rather than going, okay, well, what's the message my body is trying to give me here? Why have I got a headache? Oh yeah, I haven't had a drink for ages. I need to have a big glass of water, or I'm exhausted. I need to lie down and rest. No, you take the Panadol and you override that body messaging so you can get on with your day and do the things. And we are taught this from a young age in countless ways. I think another really pertinent example of this is, as parents, we are told to, if our baby or our children have a fever, that we need to give them Pamol to bring their fever down. Well, a fever is the body's way of killing off the bad bugs that are causing the child to be sick, right? Like the body warms up because the bacteria can't survive in a really warm environment. So by giving Pamol and bringing the fever down, we're kind of prolonging the illness. And it's just another example of like overriding body wisdom, of not trusting that our bodies are actually well made to survive and to thrive, without the need for kind of overriding or intervention. Another one is, you're on the heaviest day of your period and yes, you have to go to school, and yes, you have to do PE, and there's no, like, the body is asking you to rest and take it easy. And yeah, again, we're just sort of taught to override and not listen to our bodies. It's that we're taught that it's irresponsible and reckless to favor our self-knowledge, our intuition, or our gut feelings, or those sorts of messages that are coming through our bodies, over expert knowledge. So we're taught that the doctors and the midwives, they're the experts in our bodies and our babies, not us. And yes, of course, they have some expert knowledge. Of course, as midwives and doctors, they have specialist knowledge, but nobody is more expert in your body than you are, and nobody has the intuitive sense or the connection with your baby like you do. So there is information that you have about yourself and your body that no expert can have. And yeah, we're taught though that it's irresponsible if we listen to our intuition rather than do what that doctor says. And there's just so much fear created around birth in general. We just need to think about the stories that most of us hear growing up, or the births that we see on the TV, or like just take the number of people who are choosing to birth in a hospital when they have the option of birthing at home, or in a birth centre. In New Zealand, I think when midwives gained independence and that we expected that the home birth numbers were going to soar, and they didn't. And yeah, they sit at around 3 to 5% of people choosing to birth at home. So there is still a lot of fear out there, because why would we be choosing to birth in the hospital if we trusted ourselves to be able to give birth without medical interference? We don't. We don't trust our bodies. Most of us don't really believe that we are capable of birthing without some without some form of medical assistance. Power dynamics play a huge role. And obviously, if I'm talking about disempowerment, it's usually because there's a power imbalance in the birth space. And yeah, so we see this most clearly when through this lack of informed consent that's taking place. So if women aren't being given all the information, then how are they able to give or refuse consent? It's not actually consent if you agree to something that you don't fully understand or you don't have all the information for. So, I gave an example before of a lack of information provided with regards to that woman being advised to have an induction at 39 weeks. Inductions, I have a real bee in my bonnet about them, because I would say the majority of the people that I work with had an induction of labour as part of their traumatic birth story. And the rates of induction are just going up and up as well. And yeah, so what I'm hearing is that women are being told all the risks of staying pregnant, of not inducing, of waiting for her body to spontaneously go into labour. So they're being told, the risk of stillbirth goes up, or we're worried that your baby will get too big and get stuck, and shoulder dystocia, and so there's all these kind of like the risks of staying pregnant are exaggerated or put to the woman in such a way that there's a lot of fear around it. Often the actual statistics aren't shared. But then the risks associated with induction of labour are just not talked about at all. Like I never hear anybody saying, I was told that this and that might happen, and that there was an increased chance of this and that, and I just never hear it. Women are led to believe it's just another way to give birth, and yay, I get to meet my baby sooner, and yay, I can kind of plan around. We've got a date that's set, awesome. And yeah, of course, I don't want my baby getting too big. How awful would that be, trying to push an even bigger baby out? Like, it's painted as a perfectly safe option, and it is not safe. I see the trauma it creates day in, day out. It is not safe, and I don't believe that's talked about enough with women who are agreeing to that intervention. I have pretty much one whole lesson when I do my Healing Birth Practitioner training program. We have 2 weeks of talking about the impacts of common interventions. And one of those lessons is just about completely devoted to talking about induction of labour. It's a huge topic. And yeah, like I said before, it just leads to so much trauma. And unpacking that story for people and helping them to understand that was, led them to not be able to bond with their baby, or to feeling like they were a failure, but that their body wasn't actually letting them down. Helping them to understand that gives them a whole new picture, instead of like, I wasn't strong enough, I had to have an epidural because it was just too painful. I'm not made for birth. I couldn't push the baby out, it was too hard. They're not understanding, well, it's completely, a spontaneous labour and an induced labour are two completely different scenarios for multiple reasons. So yeah, lack of informed consent, women not being listened to. This came through so much in that trauma survey that I did, birth trauma survey. yeah, women not being listened to. Something feels wrong, or I feel like the baby's coming. I remember one of the quotes is like, I was told, you know, I was strapped up to the machines and told I had another 12, at least another 12 hours to go. You know, like if I wasn't going to have pethidine, there was nothing else they could do for me, and to try and relax and get some sleep or something. Half an hour later, I was holding my 4 kg baby in my hands. You know, so these sorts of scenarios where she's going, and she was like, I wish I'd listen to the woman and not the machines. So yeah, this sort of wording came through a lot. And actually with regards to lack of informed consent, if we think about the language that we hear women using when they describe their traumatic births, you'll often hear things like, I wasn't allowed to go more than 42 weeks. You know, I had to have a cesarean, or I had to have a cesarean because my baby was breech. Yeah, they told me I couldn't such and such. So I've written there, disregard for basic human rights in the birth space. Like it's your right to give or refuse consent for any interventions that have been suggested, right? And this is just so often not adhered to. And women are told in their pregnancies, you have the right to choose, and you have the right to informed consent, and you can say no. And but the reality when you're in labour, and you're in an environment that's not your own, where there's these people, these authority figures that are telling you wouldn't want a dead baby on your hands, would you? Which is a horrific thing to say to anybody. But you know, this happens, and it happens a lot within the birth space. And there's so many sort of basic human rights that, like, I just hear stories of things that, like, if that had happened in any other department of the hospital, it would be like, what happened? You know, like, you were showering and they left the door open so that anybody who was walking past could see you, and you couldn't do anything about it because, you know, like, there's just things that happen within birth that, yeah, because it's birth, it's accepted, it's sanctioned even. And yeah, lack of informed consent is a big part of that. If a woman feels coerced or bullied into saying yes to an intervention, she hasn't given consent. If she lays a complaint about the lack of informed consent that took place, it's very, very rare that there will be any consequences of that. So while we are told we have the right to informed decision-making and consent, it's not the reality, and there is no consequences for the people who are not enabling informed consent. Yeah. And I've written down the bottom there, remember, half of the birthing population, by the time they, you know, come to give birth, will have experienced sexual violence in their lives. And a lot of them won't have revealed that to their care team. And so we need to be, I mean, we should be treating everybody like this anyway, but we need to be treating every birthing person like they have a history of sexual assault, you know, because we often won't know if that's the case or not. And you can imagine how incredibly triggering and traumatizing it would be for somebody who has a history like that to, say, have a vaginal examination performed on them roughly and without full and full consent. And when she says, no, stop, it's hurting. And oh, just a little, I just need to, I won't be much longer. Just take some deep breaths. That's big stuff. Yeah, I'm running out of time. Looking at the clock, it's 10 to 8. Oh yeah, over medicalization. So I've already sort of talked a lot about the statistics that are continuing to rise with a lack of evidence behind this rise. And how do I want to say this? Like, I think a big part of the reason there is such an over medicalization of birth is because birth and its unpredictability and its wildness, it doesn't fit the mold of standard the medical model of care. Medicine likes predictability. It likes to be able to control and to compartmentalize the different aspects of, the body, etc. A birthing woman's body there is such potent links between what is going on in her mind and brain and how her body responds to that. And that's completely ignored within the medical model. There is no real understanding or acknowledgement, or I don't think even knowledge about how impactful a sense of safety is in terms of a woman's ability to birth her baby in a safe, efficient, and rewarding way, right? Sarah Buckley, if you haven't followed her work, she's amazing. Dr. Sarah Buckley in Australia has done a lot of work on the hormonal influences in pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding, motherhood. And she talks about, she says 65 million years of mammalian evolution has ensured that birth is inherently a safe, rewarding, and efficient process. We are mammals, we're women, we are designed to give birth. The reason that it has become so unsafe is because we are not acknowledging the importance of looking after a woman's sense of safety when it comes to giving birth. Because when she feels safe and when she feels trusting of her ability to birth without intervention, when she feels trusting of the people in her birth space, then her body is going to respond by giving her the hormones that will help to progress her labor and will help her to cope with the growing intensity and pain of labor. That will prime her to meet her baby in love. That will prime her to be able to breastfeed and mother her baby. When we feel unsafe in birth, when we doubt ourselves, we don't trust our bodies, when our care providers we don't have a rapport with them, we don't feel safe, then birth is an intense time when it's easy to not feel safe in birth. So yeah, we're going to be thrown into a fight or flight mode, and that's going to slow the labor process down, and that's going to increase the degree of pain a woman experiences. It's going to increase the likelihood of the baby becoming distressed. There's all these kind of flow-on effects. So we really, really need more healthcare providers, midwives, doctors, doulas, birthing people to understand birthing physiology, to understand how their birthing body works, and the impacts of fear on that physiology or safety on that physiology. So how can we create a birth environment that supports our physiology and helps us to feel safe. And that will minimize the odds of birth becoming traumatic. But because there's this lack of knowledge around physiology, there is a lack of trust in birth and in birthing women's bodies. And there's a lack of respect for our innate capacity to give birth unaided, for the most part. Of course, there are always going to be a portion of the birthing population who will need medical interventions to have safe outcomes. But that should be a small fraction, and it's currently only a very small fraction of women who are birthing without some form of intervention taking place. Yeah, and of course, the unpredictability of birth means that it makes it really tricky for rostering in the hospital, for having enough beds available at any one time. So it's much more convenient and helpful to know when a woman's going to go into labour. So yeah, let's schedule that induction, because that's going to be easier to deal with and manage, you know, than just, oh well, she might have her baby today, or she might not have her baby for another 3 weeks yet, you know. And yeah, so we kind of push women's labours as having to fit into these sort of narrow norms, especially around time. So, you know, she's only allowed to be pushing for 2 hours with a first birth, or 1 hour with a second or subsequent birth, before she's going to start feeling the pressure to have, you know, forceps or ventouse, or maybe even cesarean, these sorts of things. So she's, yeah, these norms that are really not based on, again, good evidence a lot of the time. If she doesn't fit them, then there's going to be interventions being encouraged. Yeah, and like I said earlier, you know, only about 3 to 5% of women in New Zealand are choosing to birth at home, despite it being an option for the majority of women. And so that says a lot about our beliefs around our ability to birth without assistance, or our degree of trust in our birth process. Yeah, so I've talked about those other things. So the application, this is the last slide, or second to last one. The application to like helping people to find healing after they've experienced birth trauma is helping them, like I've said tonight a couple of times, it's helping them to understand that their body wasn't faulty, right? So, you know, my body just wouldn't go into labor. I got to 42 weeks and I had to be induced because my body just wouldn't go into labor, you know, like, so helping them to understand, yeah, some people go to 43, 44 weeks of pregnancy, but we wouldn't know it because people are generally pushed into having inductions if they get to 42 weeks. That they weren't too weak, you know. There's so many of the voices I hear, the words I hear around people's experience of birth trauma. I hear all this guilt and shame and self-doubt coming through, and I feel like the most incredible gift I'm able to give them in this role is to help them see how their trauma was not their fault, that it was nothing to do with them being too weak or their body being faulty, that, you know, the cesarean that they had, the emergency cesarean they had before failure to progress in labour, it wasn't that their body was failing them, it was their body trying to protect them and their baby from birthing in a space where there was a lack of safety. and talking to them about what actually happens in their brain and their hormones when they feel unsafe, and why that causes this label of failure to progress to occur. And that had they had different support and different information at the time, then their labour may well have progressed just fine. So yeah, creating a new narrative for people, and one that says your trauma was not your fault. You are not, you're not to blame for what happened. And yeah, bonding issues are like huge. Among the women who I work with, so often I hear the story of, and when the baby was put on me, I just felt nothing, or I felt numb, or I wanted them to take the baby away, or it didn't feel like my baby. And the amount of shame and grief that mamas clearly feel when they are very vulnerably sharing that reality, and then helping them to understand that this is a really normal and common response to a traumatic birth, that I hear this from heaps of other mothers, you're not alone. That's huge. And then to have an explanation that goes, you didn't have access to that powerful love drug, that oxytocin, that is what causes you to feel an instant connection and bond with your baby. You didn't have access to that at the time that your baby was born. So, and your brain was focused on survival. It wasn't prioritizing you falling in love with your baby. So that can help to just shift so much of the guilt and self-blame. What about if it's a situation where it's shitty bad luck, for example, stillbirth? Yeah, it is harder when I'm working with people who have a genuine shitty bad luck scenario. It is harder. It is harder to, it's not harder to support their healing journey. It's just different. So it's not about changing a narrative. Usually it's not anyway. It's not helping them to see things in a different light. It's more just an opportunity for them to share what's gone on for them, in a space that's, there's no judgment and no trying to fix, right? Like a lot of what we do in my Healing Birth Practitioner training program is around learning the art of holding space. And actually, although I've been talking tonight about how, and this slide particularly, about how I use this knowledge to help people in their healing process, actually the biggest thing that I do is hold space for them to share their story. And that alone is really big for a lot of people. Often when they share their story with me, it's the first time that they've felt really seen and heard and validated in their experience. And that can shift a lot for people. And so when I'm working with somebody who does have a shitty bad luck scenario, often the biggest part is them just having a safe space to share their story, and offering them some tools for kind of like, these are some things you can do to continue your healing journey, when we leave this call. Yeah, hope that answered your question. Yeah, that they didn't make poor decisions. Like, I'm forever saying to people, nobody wanted a safe outcome for you and your baby more so than you did. And so whatever choices you made, whatever things you said yes or no to at the time, you made them in the belief that that was going to give you the safest outcome. And with different information and different support, you might have made different decisions. But at the time, you made the best decisions based on the support and information you had available to you. And it's actually nonsensical to think that you would have done otherwise. Yeah. and the other application to kind of the healing journey is that they now have a different perspective on what a future birth could look like for them, because they've been left with these beliefs that they kind of failed or they weren't strong enough, or that this is just how birth is. It's scary and painful and traumatizing. When we talk through things and they can see things through in a new light, they can see the potential for having a really different birth experience the next time. So a lot of people, when I first work with them, are like, I'm never getting pregnant again. I don't have any intentions. So like that would be terrifying. And a lot of them do shift that mindset after we've worked together. Yeah. So I think, so yeah, just a little, so I run this Healing Birth Practitioner training program for people who really want to dive deep into this stuff and feel really kind of confident and competent around their ability to work with people who have experienced birth trauma. And I'm starting the February round tomorrow, which is super exciting. So yeah, if you are interested in potentially doing that training, it's a 10-week program. It's awesome. I love it. I would love to talk with you more about that. So just reach out if you want to learn more about it. Alrighty. How often do I run them? Lisa, I've got one starting February, one starting in June, and then one starting in October. So yeah, 3. Yeah, and I ran 3 last year, and I think 3 the year before. It's kind of seems to work well. Is it all online? Yes, it is. It's done through the Cohere platform that you guys use to come onto this. This is my kind of coaching platform that I use. And so there's 10 weeks, and each week there's a lesson that's been pre-recorded, so you watch that in your own time, and usually that's about an hour and a half long, and it's obviously on a particular topic. Each week we have different sort of themes of topics, and then on Thursday evening New Zealand time at 7:30 till 9 p.m. we get on a Zoom call together, and I call it an interactive Zoom session, where we talk about what came up for people and listening to that lesson content. Do they have any questions? What are their own experiences they want to share with the group, their own wisdom, insights? And that's a really awesome part of the course. It's I love those Thursday night sessions. And yeah, so it is all online. But yeah, it's not all pre-recorded, it's interactive as well. Is it possible to be enrolled if we can't attend the Thursdays? Yes, it is. So I have a woman in America who's doing this February training. Her time zone is completely different, so it would be like midnight for her. She's not going to be able to be on the Thursday calls. And I had another woman come through the training from New Zealand, but she was teaching classes on a Thursday night, so that wasn't possible for her to come. I think she made it to 1 or 2 of them. So it's all recorded, and if you cannot come to the Thursday sessions, then you are required to watch the recordings. And I ask that you kind of send in any thoughts or questions or whatever from the lesson content so that I can bring them to the group. But it's a really cool part of the training. So if it's like, well, if I wait till June or October, I'll be able to attend the Thursdays, then I would suggest doing that, because I sort of feel like you're missing out on the most epic bit of the course if you can't attend the Thursday nights. Yes. You teach on Thursdays too. So yeah, it's possible to do it. It's just not as cool. And for everybody else, I say, yeah, you need to attend at least 50% of them, but mostly people, you know, there's one or two they can't attend, and otherwise they're there. What else was I going to say about that? That's gone. Oh, no, I know what I was going to say. A lot of people who do the training, you know, it's a tricky time for them if they've got little ones in that 7:30 till 9. And so sometimes there've been like people on the call that are like lying down in the bed with their baby breastfeeding, and they've got, you know, they're muted, they haven't got the sound on or whatever, but they're kind of just there listening, or you know, coming and going from the call as need be. I'm just like, I appreciate you guys need to prioritize and that, but yeah, all the recordings are there for people who miss them. Choice, Eartha, that sounds great. And I've heard wonderful things about you. It's nice seeing your name pop up as somebody who is here. Yeah. Any other questions or anything you want to share or ask about with regards to what we've been talking about tonight? No? You're all good? If you're frantically typing in the chat box, you can just take yourself off mute and share, but no. Okay, well, I will leave it at that then, and farewell you all. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate you being here tonight. I think it's just so important for as many people as possible, but especially birth workers, people who are working in the birth space or with new mums, to have this knowledge, to really understand this stuff, because yeah, we need some pretty drastic changes to be being made out there in the birthing world, and yeah, like the more people that understand this stuff, the better. Awesome, Jamie. Yep, so the recording will be in the same place that you found the link to join this course, and it will have, you know, the option to replay or whatever. It'll be sitting there for you to go and listen to anytime that you want to. So yeah, awesome. Well, I hope I hear from some of you who perhaps want to, you know, like explore doing the practitioner training, or who just want to yeah, be kept in the loop about what I've got coming up, because I intend to do these regularly. I'm looking forward to it. All right, my doorbell's just gone, so I'm going to say good night to you all, and hopefully see you soon. Thanks for being here.